Hello, my name is Scott Sonnon. I'm the former U.S. National Sambo Team coach and champion. And today what I'm going to be sharing with you is how to take traditional Sambo and adapt it to your mixed martial art and submission fighting game. In order to understand that, we need to go back a little bit and cover how you're theoretically going to be transitioning the traditional Sambo game. So, Ryan, if you can lay down. If you think of Sambo as having a 60-second ground fighting time, you have a very fast wrestling approach. So if I throw Ryan down to the ground, I only have 60 seconds to operate down here before I have to stand back up. That basically means that as soon as he's down on the ground, I have to grab a leg, pinch, and apply. Now, the problem with that is when you take that 60 seconds and expand it to an unlimited time, when you have maybe 10 or 15 minutes or longer on the ground, then he can apply positional fighting. For instance, if I go for this very quick lock and he has time to work for position, he's going to pass right away. Now, the reason that the sophistication of jiu-jitsu guard work didn't evolve in Sambo is because there's no encouragement to. There's no point advantage for passing the guard in Sambo. So he has no motivation to come upstairs. If I throw him down to the ground and go for a leg, he's going to reciprocate and grab a leg of his own, because we have a very short time period down here before they stand us back up. With that being said, the same thing is true with jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu has a longer game, and since there's a cultural stigma traditionally against leg locks, they'll stay predominantly upstairs, and if they are down here, they're working to pass through this to go upstairs, where they're ignoring or at least neglecting all of the opportunities below. So in order to translate Sambo into mixed martial art competition, you have to see that there's a whole game here. And I'm going to describe this in two different ways. You have upper half positional fighting, which is basically from cross-side or top knee on belly upwards. And lower half positional fighting, which is lower knee on belly downwards. And we're going to go over everything from this point downward. And throughout the series, you'll see different entries that will smoothly and solidly take you downstairs and give you positional maintenance so you're never sacrificing techniques. Unfortunately, or sacrificing position. Unfortunately, leg locks have just been tagged on to upper half positional fighting. So you may have a good position where you're working here and suddenly throw yourself down to go for a leg lock and sacrifice position. You have to apply it very quickly in order to have any type of effectiveness. We're not going to do that. What I'm going to share with you is a way to keep this seamless so that you're never sacrificing positional control of your opponent and can go downstairs. There are two ways you can approach the material. The way I suggest is going to be the long, slow way. But there's also a fast, short way. Fast, short game is like an express elevator. It'll take you to the 5th floor. You'll take a technique, because these are really going to be attractive. When you see some of the techniques, they're very cool. And you can add them onto your current game. You'll see one entry that will take you down to a leg lock. And you can practice that one and just build it off of your current upper half positional fighting game. The second way, the long, slow way, is learning how to fight within position so that you're developing the mechanical stability. When you learn the key components of each one of these positions, when you learn how to fight and maintain these different mechanics, your game will be that much stronger when you do reintegrate it with upper half positional fighting. I suggest that you take the time to go through the developmental drills and work on the long, slow game. But if you only have a week or two, you don't want to vary your approach before an event too much, because you don't want to try and mess with your tactics that you've been developing. But if you have the opportunity, if you're 3 or 4 months out from an event, or if you don't compete in any events and you're just practicing for your own personal development, then work on the long, slow game, which is taking each developmental drill and working on the mechanics. So throughout the course of the DVDs, draw what you want to work on. As long as you're focusing on the key mechanics, you're going to continue to improve. We'll begin with the 7 key mechanics. With each mechanic that you concentrate upon, you're establishing greater control. So what I'd like you to focus on is practicing the mechanics, developing them in the sequence that I teach them to you. They work from highest percentage to lowest percentage. If you start in the reverse order, it's the least likely that you'll be able to finalize the lock. But if you start in the order that I'm going to teach you, you have the highest percentage chance. So let's begin with the first key mechanic. And that is, taking a look at his hip fold, the crease of his hip runs up at a diagonal. The more that you control this hip, the more that you control this triangle of a pelvis. If you control his pelvis, you control his lower back, you control his spine. So to control this hip fold is your goal if you want to establish lower body positional fighting. If you control just his thigh, he's going to have so much wiggle room that you won't have control of his pelvis or lower back. So the goal is to take your shin, if you look at the bone of your shin, that flat bone, take the edge of that sword and bury it into his hip fold. Here. So if you're in mixed martial art competition or class, he has a cup on. If you imagine where his cup is and his thigh is, you want to come into that nook and go up as high as you can. If he doesn't have a cup on, this is going to hurt and it'll be effective anyway. So drive up and in and immediately start compressing closer to his pelvis. So the first is removing all of the slop. The higher up you are, the less control you have on his pelvis, and he can shrimp his knee out. The lower down you get, the more control, so that as he moves his body, you're attached to him. Now, this is where the first false triangle comes in. And I call it a false triangle because it's an arm and leg. If you're grabbing a hold of your own laces, even if he gets wrist control, by having this shin hip fold connection, as he tries to move his body, you're attached to him. So this is your first and most important component. The next component, this mechanic is placing your knee on the mat, which you're going to always be fighting down. Because as you're rolling around, there's going to be a lot of crock rolling. As you're rolling around and the knee pops up, that's where he can start to pass. He can pull his knee out. If he clears his knee beyond your thigh, you're out of position. Now it's best to just abandon, go for the other leg, or go upstairs. So for lower body positional fighting, you want to keep the knee within the crest of this triangle. Fight your knee to the mat. Now, from a striking perspective, if your knee is off the mat and not in his ribs, he can make contact with your face. But if you fight your knee down to the mat and in his ribs, for him to strike you, he has to strike across your knee. Go ahead. He's not going to have the torque to apply power. So you can lean back. Plus, with your knee down, even if he has control of your neck, by driving the knee into his ribs, your leg will always be stronger. This is structure, that is muscle. So let's slide back a little. So fighting the knee down to the mat and into his ribs. Second mechanic. Next mechanic, let's spin around. When you're applying the shin and the hip fold, always work on underhooking this foot. It's a good habit to get used to, so that he isn't, as soon as you throw this leg over, this isn't standing up for him to bump across and start to pass. So immediately start to underhook this thigh when you're working shin and hip fold and knee down. The third mechanic is driving this leg away, and I call it a slip knot, because you're coming back around and digging underneath. And there are several key components here. So if I just come straight back, see how there's slop right here? With this slop, it's going to be an easy push for him to break this hold. So tighten it by slipping back and tucking underneath. Next, pull your toes up to your knee so that this becomes one flat surface. If it's not, if your toes are pointed, as he goes for a simple pass, that'll pop right off. There's no platform to gain purchase on for you to keep your overlacing figure four. So toes up, pull in. And lastly, your overlacing four has to go underneath his sits bones. Now there are different, in traditional Sambo, there are holds like the wishbone here, where I'm driving this away. And it works on some inflexible people. Ryan's pretty flexible, so he's gonna mock what it's like to be inflexible. Pull your knee in. Yeah. It'll work somewhat on inflexible people or guys with big legs. But if they understand how to remove this, all they have to do is pull underneath the heel and pop it over. So you need to protect this leg. If it's just here, he can bring his knee to his chest, pop it across, and break your four and start to pass. However, if you pass this underneath the sits bones, it becomes really difficult for him to get underneath there and remove it. And while he's battling to break your position, you're moving slowly, methodically to end his leg career. Let's move back a little. So your slip knot, you've placed your shin in the hip fold, fought the knee down to the mat and into his ribs, taken this away, slip knotted in, pulled the toes up, tucked the leg underneath the sits bones. So let's move on to the next mechanic. Spin around again. Now, before you start applying the tourniquet, which is the mechanic after this, you need to slide down the fire pole, because all of this wiggling around, all of the fighting that he's doing to break position, as he's going to break position, he's gaining little tiny increments of space. Those little micro movements are removing control from his pelvis. So before you start going upstairs to finalize the technique, you need to apply the fire pole. And the fire pole is just like it sounds. You're sliding down the length of his knee. So you take his leg and you pull it straight up away. You don't try and hunker down and push it away from you. Pull it straight up and bring your pelvis down to his sits bones to remove all of the space from your shin to his hip fold and your knee to his ribs. Maintain here. But as soon as you removed all of that slop, as soon as you're as tight as you can, because any freedom that he has is space. Space allows him to move. You want to suck away all of his freedom. By removing his freedom, you control him, and that's what positional dominance is, even when it's lower half. So suck away all that freedom. Let's move up here a little. And once you have, then you can start applying, tightening that noose, which I call the tourniquet. And the reason that I call it a tourniquet is for the obvious reason that as I squeeze and I'm pulling my knees together, and if you think of this knee coming underneath and kicking this leg through, the heel coming through here, this knee coming over, come towards me a little bit, Ryan. By squeezing together, I'm restricting the circulation to his leg. Blood flow can't leave, blood flow has a hard time going down. By doing that, it's deadening this area. It becomes really thick, lactic acid builds up, it's harder for him to control. He has a lot less sensitivity to how to wiggle his leg out of the way. Plus, if you have a cup on and it's positioned correctly, there's also nerve plexi in here. You can hit the peroneal nerve, the femoral nerve. It may not cause a submission, sometimes it will, but it will definitely make him uncomfortable. So by squeezing this out of the way, now it becomes a lot easier to move into the next mechanic, which is the back brace. So if he can't break these mechanics so far, because I have a good tourniquet, I continue to fight the knee down, I have a good tucked slip knot. My 4 is tucked underneath his sits bones, right? If he can't break this, what is he going to do to stop this from happening? If I'm reaching up here, he's going to go from wrist control or elbow control to peel off so that I can't get the leg lock. And that's fine. You still have positional control, but this is going to consume a lot of your energy. You don't have energy to waste. You want to use the least amount of effort once you have control. You want to surf his tension so that you're not trying to use force against force. It's easy to get caught up here where you're wrist fighting, right? And this is blowing all of your energy reserves. Okay, so once you get into position, you apply the tourniquet. Even if he goes for this arm, you're taking this and tucking it all the way behind your back. And I'm going to spin around to show you quick. Take this arm, tuck it up as high as you can. Your goal is to trap this leg in place. By trapping it in place, now you have control of it, and you can go to finalize the technique depending upon how he moves his leg. But that moves us into the last mechanic, and I'm going to stay here, and then we're going to spin around. The final mechanic to move from the back brace. You can see if Ryan tries to go for this. The most that he can get is the elbow, but he can't control my wrist, and that allows me to move into place. And the last component is what I call a knife hand. Keeping the hand married to the waist, sliding it up underneath his calf. The more that you lift this out of place, the more likely that he can snag it. So you want to keep it in place, slide it around and underneath, and I'm going to show you when we spin around what we're going to do with that. It's easy at this point to start thinking that we're doing a leg lock. Don't think like that. This is just the last part of the position. We're establishing the final component, the final mechanic of the position. So don't be in a rush. You have everything set. Take a breath. If you can exhale through this, you're more likely to get a submission hold. So don't rush. At this point, rushing would be counterproductive. So take that knife hand. I'm going to slide it up, just like I showed you, slide it up and around the waist. Now, see the space here? We need to remove this. Because initially, what do we think? We think leg lock. We try and apply as much of a surface area as possible so that we can apply as much strength as possible. But this is all arms. I'm completely ignoring that I have position. The position is what applies the submission. The position is what does it, not your arms. Your arms are just the place that the leg is causing pain. You're not using them for juice. It's just the fulcrum. So you need to remove this air, all of this slop here, by placing your hips up. As you slide this knife hand into place, if you make a fist like in traditional Sambo and traditional leg locks, you've created more space. More space means more wiggle room. More wiggle room, means less likelihood that you're applying the fulcrum. So what do you need to do? You need to use arm strength in order to apply it. We don't want to use arm strength. It takes a long time and it costs a lot of energy. So knife hand, keep it married to your belly. Now I'm going to remove his leg for a second. Feel down at your hip. That saddle, and this is why we're taking his saddle and we're using our saddle, which is why these are called saddle positions. The iliac crest of your hip. Take your knife hand and place it right on top of that bone. Place your hand flat. The width of your hand should marry all the way up to your ribs, so that becomes one solid unit. It shouldn't be fleshy. Listen, if you still have a lot of belly girth, this is going to be a problem. And you're going to want to go back to trying to use as much as you can. Resist the temptation. Practice taking your belly and pressing it down so that you can get to your ribs. It's good practice. Press all the way down and then go in. Even if you're a heavyweight, practice the proper mechanics first. Once you're down in position, now watch. When I remove the slop from my hips underneath the nape of his knee, now my hip moves into the side of my hand, the edge of my hand moves upward, and that's what applies the technique. Notice that I'm not using any arm strength to do this. So I've slid my knife hand into place, I remove the slop, and he's finished. Okay, we're going to go into the leg locks later, because what happens here doesn't really matter. We get obsessed with all of the elaborate techniques that we could do to submit this area. But we ignore the fact that that all happens from establishing the correct position and fighting to maintain this position. So the final mechanic, knife hand, remove the slop, drive your knee, keep fighting it down, because as you drive that knee down, I don't want to do this too much to Ryan, as you drive that knee down, that's what's applying your hips up and placing the fulcrum where it needs to be. So let's recap all 7 key components. Shin into his hip fold. Fight the knee down onto the mat into his ribs. Kick away and slip knot back, pulling your toes to the overlacing knee, tucking the foot of your overlacing knee between his sits bones. Fire pull down to remove any of the slop that might have happened. Apply the tourniquet and squeeze his thigh. Work all the way up and back brace to remove your hand from play. Slide your hand underneath for the knife hand. And now we're prepared to move on to look at how these 7 key mechanics work in different positions, the 4 basic positions of lower body positional fighting, before we move on to the key locks. The first and most critical of the basic positions is the full saddle. We covered all of the basic mechanics, the 7 key mechanics, in the previous section. However, we need to review the 7 key mechanics in order to understand your full saddle is the most stable of all of the saddles, of all 4 of the saddles. It's the one that you're fighting towards and the one that you should learn to fight to protect. All of the mechanics in how tight they become. Now, to understand why the full saddle is important, let's first start with the traditional Sambo positions or leg lock positions and why they're inadequate so that you don't accidentally substitute them. The first is the double knee pinch. By pinching both of his legs together and attacking one. If you just attack here, you have no stability. He can easily use strength and pop up to come and pass. It's a bad position to be in. Even if I've done leg locks, an Achilles submission 10,000 plus times, and I can apply it pretty quickly. But if he's agile, he's going to run with the pain and a pass upstairs to upper half. So I need to have braces in place. Let's say that I'm in a little better of a position, that I get a more traditional single knee pinch. This requires a lot more sophistication and entry. If I get this knee pinch, right, I have a little bit more time that I can come in here. But still, this is just like a tight spider monkey or a tight spider guard on one leg. If he understands how to pass the guard or a spider guard, he can come upstairs even if I try and defend against it. Now, if a Sambo player is a little bit more savvy, they'll work on the wishbone technique, which is trying to drive this knee across, removing that from play because it's a little bit more difficult for him to get up. That gives me a little bit more time, but if he's very flexible, like you have jiu-jitsu guys who are very flexible like Eddie Bravo and the rubber guard, he can throw that leg up around his head. It's very attribute driven. So this is pretty much ineffective. Against somebody who has really thick thighs that are inflexible, right here, this might give me a little bit of purchase, but if he knows how to underhook my Achilles, he can pull that right up and go to counter, and we're back into what is called in Russia the test of manhood. Whoever can submit who first. So the last option is a scissors, where you're crossing your legs in front of you. Now this isolates his hips, but it gives him total access to your legs so that he can counter your technique. You counter your finalization hold. And he might have actually more leverage than you do, depending upon where he rolls. Like if he applied that heel hook again and rolled down to the mat, now my knee is caught on the mat, he has more leverage than I do. It's a bad position to be in. So the purpose of the full saddle is to get the most amount of control on the hips, get into that shin-hip fold connection, fight the knee down, slip knot back and tuck your leg underneath so both of my ankles are removed. Now, if he wants to move into a striking or kicking game, I control his hips and I drive him away. I'm not applying any submissions yet. All I'm doing is controlling his hips and preventing him from striking me. Come up as close as you can. If he grabs my neck, I can break the hold just by driving my knee into his ribs and down to the mat and looking away. If he goes for wrist control, I still don't lose position on the legs. I can fight this later and not spaz out about it. So full saddle is working with the knee down to the outside of his ribs. This is the position that you should fight back to the most, and it's the one that lends you the greatest amount of dominance in the lower half positional fighting game. The second basic position in lower half positional fighting is the side saddle. Even though the full saddle is the most desirable, you will honestly fight in the side saddle most frequently because it's the easiest to enter and get to, and it's where your opponent, when he's working on his counters, recounters, and passes and sweeps, he'll place you in that. So it's more of a transitional position. You can get submissions there. I get submissions there all the time, but it's not as defensible as a full saddle. So understanding the give and take there, the side saddle switches so that your overlacing leg is on the outside. And we'll discuss the mechanics in just a second. Let's spin around the opposite direction. So all the key mechanics are still in play. Shin in the hip fold, except that when you're fighting the knee down, you're fighting the knee between his sits bones and driving it up underneath. Still, the shin has to come up between his cup and his hip fold so that you have the tightest purchase. So fight the knee down here. As you pass the knee up, that's when he can start working around this direction to pass. That's where you don't want to be. So you're constantly, this is where some of the sweeps happen. So you're constantly trying to focus to fight that knee back down when you're working side saddle. Let's spin around the other direction. So shin in the hip fold, fight the knee down between his sits bones. The overlacing, when you slip knot back, you're going to tuck this leg underneath his lower back. Now, it's going to be a lot more accessible than the full saddle. He can start to fight to pull that up towards, to underhook it. Now notice that I'm keeping it flat and buried on the ground. It makes it a lot harder for him to pull. If I have this up here, if I'm trying to brace here, he can just pop it and it becomes too accessible. So when you're fighting side saddle, drive that foot flat and then work to worm it underneath his lower back. Let's slide up here a little. Also, if he pulls this up into his armpit, you're overlacing four. If he pulls it up, no, not double Achilles, just there. If he just pulls it up there, even though he has my leg, I have positional dominance. Why is that? If he goes to apply an Achilles on me or an ankle lock and he drives back, watch what happens to my knee. Because he doesn't have an overlacing leg, my knee leaks the leverage. So he could even apply it very fast and very hard. All I have to do is lift up so he doesn't have the other end of the lever. This is where understanding the Sambo saddle positions is going to be key to finalizing your locks. Place it on again. So if we're in this position, if he goes for his lock, I fight my knee down. As he applies pressure, I lift my knee away to remove pressure, right? So that he doesn't have as much pressure, my foot's flat. By moving my knee away, what do? I lift up my hips, remove slop, and that automatically submits him. So just by evading, like sometimes if you have somebody who's not as sophisticated as you in your lower half game, sometimes you might want to even feed this to him. By giving it to him, as he applies pressure, that will finish him because it will add leverage into your lock. So when you're fighting side saddle, always work on keeping that figure four tight because he's going to also work on popping it up, removing that brace to start passing that and going through the guard. So you're constantly fighting there, and you're going to find that inside saddle, you're fighting to hold this leg while you're working for your submission. So stay tight, wrestle this leg in, fire pull down just like you do, right? The back brace isn't as prevalent because if you spin around, as you fight the back brace down, as you fight the knee down, notice how the back brace is underneath here. When we start working on some of the sweeps, you'll notice that as he goes to his belly, I'm going to do this gently. As he goes to his belly, my back brace stays here so it's out of the way, so that when I apply juice, it's a gravity hold, and his leg could break very easily. So I'm going to take it easy here. The back brace is to make your body into a cylinder so that as he rolls, you're out of the way. If you have big bony profiles sticking out here, when he goes to roll, these get caught and he can squirm his leg out. So the back brace is crucial of keeping it underneath here, even though you're fighting the knee down. The third basic position is the reverse saddle. Now, you'll see the reverse saddle as an easy entry, and you'll be tagging on a lot of these techniques from your upper half positional fighting game. But the most important part for the long, slow game so that you're seamless in your lower half positional fighting is understanding how there's a transitional event between the full saddle and the reverse saddle. If you get this seamlessness, once you lock onto his leg with the full saddle, he's not going anywhere. So let's start by looking at the full saddle. For him to, one of the ways that he can try and sweep or pass the full saddle is by bumping the bottom knee up. If he gets to this position and starts working around behind, that's where you're moving into reverse saddle. So let's spin around. So we're at this position, my knee's up. I've broken the second key mechanic. But that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily out of position. If I spin, and I don't necessarily even have to spin, if I entice him to go to back position because he thinks by going to my back he's going to be in an advantageous position. If he goes to back position, he thinks he's going to be better off here. He's wrong. But by letting him think this, he's going to be helping us move into reverse saddle. So let's spin a little bit farther. And looking at reverse saddle, I still need to keep the mechanics in place. I still need to be near his shin, his hip fold. I still need to keep my triangle tight. And I need to wrestle that leg in tight. I need to, now, the shin and the hip fold isn't, if you see my legs, I'm not tucked in. But, can you remove your arms for a second? Think of it this way. Here's his crease. To get into this crease, I need to take my sits bones and marry onto his hip. So when I fire pull down, I'm driving my hips into place. That way, if he moves his hips, our bodies move as one unit. So if I fail and he passes my full saddle as he spins the back position, drive your hips down. Once your hips are down, settle. So just relax. Take it easy. You might want to create an additional brace here so that as you fire pull down under his knee pit, you can relax. There's nothing he can do from here. Even if he could reach your neck, he couldn't do anything viable with it. If he can reach one of your arms, he can't do anything viable with it because he doesn't have the leverage. Okay? So just settle down, relax. Once you're in position, keep that tourniquet on and start to work. Now the back brace is a little different in reverse saddle because you're working to go behind your head as you lengthen out. As you lengthen out, you're moving behind your head and underneath. So I don't want to go into the submission holds yet, but by locking the leg here behind your own head, protecting your arms, now he can't get wrist control. If I'm here, he can start to fight, right? Unfortunately, people lose knee bars because they keep their arms open to being hooked. But if you marry his lower leg to your upper body, by marrying it here, no matter what he does to hook, since we're not requiring our arms in order to apply submissions, he can't do anything viable. Now he can go to start breaking the floor and shrimping this knee out. So that's why you still need to keep position beneath. So still need to tuck that up behind. Let's spin again. One leg this way. When you're in the reverse saddle, think of tucking your overlacing leg up behind his crack. Bend it down. Lift this leg. Tuck it up underneath so that it's hardest for him to get to. Reverse saddle, once you're in position, he's pretty much toast. Because if he lengthens, it's a knee bar. If he compresses, it's a knee slice. If he turns, it's a heel hook. So you're only focusing on establishing that position. If he tries to pass back, he doesn't like this position, he starts scooting around, other direction. If he starts scooting around, right, you move back into full saddle. For your third basic position. In your last basic position, the rear saddle, it'll look familiar, but we have to go back and take a look at the 7 key mechanics and how they apply, because you'll be transitioning. The rear saddle looks like a departure, but actually you'll work back and forth between it and the other saddle positions. So we'll start with Ryan in a turtle, and I'll show you the entrance there and why the mechanics are a little different than the way they traditionally appear. So in a turtle position, can you back up? Can you back up? And come out a little bit higher off your shins. The traditional entry is to keep my shin married close to his. And by doing this, with our shins not overlacing, it's a no-no to do this in wrestling, right? If I lace this over top in wrestling, we get entangled in folk style. But yet folk style wrestling, this is how it's traditionally called leg ride. However, for the rear saddle, we need to lock this in to begin to insert our triangle. So the first thing is when we lace it in, we're immediately confirming this in place and moving up into his knee pit to get into our triangle. So this is the top position. Now, let's spin around this way. From here, once I've locked this in place, I'm still controlling his hips. So I need to lay down on top of his hips. Otherwise, he's going to sit out. Or worse, knee in. If he threads his knee in, now we're in a half guard. And I just lost all of the dominance that I had. And that's fine. We can work back. But instead of losing that, letting him knee thread through, if I lay down here and control this hip, take this arm underneath here and block this so that he can't knee thread underneath. Lock in the triangle, and that's when we can start to begin our positions. Now, I'm breaking him down right now. I broke down his base. Let's spin around just a quarter. I broke down his base, and that's good because he can't do anything right now. Now, there's a whole array of submissions that we can do. We can do it on the far leg. We can work into traditional things like banana splits, or we can work to the near leg, work into knee slices. Stick with understanding the basic positions. Once you've locked in your triangle and you stay married to his pelvis, keep this, think of this as your back brace so that you can control both sides of his hips. All of the submissions that happen from here are all toast. These become elementary once you establish a good hold on his leg and control into the hip fold. Now, that looks simple enough, right? But it's not, because of the wiggle room he's going to create with his pelvis. If you're down too low on his calf and you lock this in, if the knee is free here, he can shrimp that knee out. Look, he's automatically going to back position, right? I don't have much control here, and that's actually a half guard on its side. It's not a very good position, so we have to keep this knee from getting free. Secondly, we don't want this underside hip to be free, because as soon as this hip is free, if I'm just concentrating here, he can If he's flexible enough, bring this knee out of the way and start to thread it underneath and move to back position. And now I'm really in a bad way. So rear saddle is much more than just a leg ride. Rear saddle is controlling the hips. Can you go back to parterre? So bring it up and underneath. And you might even want to, when you're entering it, you might even want to establish your shin in his hip, in his crack first before you place it in deep to control his pelvis. That way, you have deeper hold. Okay, spin again, quarter. Deeper hold immediately for rear saddle. The first and most critical of your core locks is the Achilles. Unfortunately, you don't see the Achilles very often because it's hard to get and requires practice. It's a lot easier to try and slap on a heel hook. Unfortunately, if you don't practice the Achilles submission first, you get very sloppy and there's too much slack, too much space, too much freedom in all of the subsequent locks. Plus, if you don't practice the Achilles first, all of these look like separate techniques. If you practice the Achilles first, you'll realize this is a flow that no matter where he moves, he places himself in submission. That's much different than a chain of techniques. You're not trying to apply one after another after another. It's not if-then. He moves and places himself into position. You're just surfing where he's trying to apply too much strength. So when you're looking at the Achilles submission, the reason that people don't practice it effectively is because they typically practice it only under competitive stress. When you get stressed out, you go gross motor. You use large motions rather than fine motions. You need to practice just methodically on the mechanics. If I go too fast, what do? I try and apply as much strength as possible. So I end up applying my soft tissue to the soft tissue of his leg. Now, maybe you'll get it. If he's really tight, like guys that do kickboxing and boxing a lot, they have really tight calves because they're used to being up on the balls of their feet, right? Grapplers tend not to be that tight because they don't have to rest on a standing position like that often. But if you look at the rule of thirds are, if you look at my forearm's broken into 3 lengths: the lower length, the middle length, and the top. The lower third of my forearm should be applied to the lower third of his leg at a right angle, so perpendicular. If you look closely at my forearm, there's a nook where there's no bone, so that no matter how muscular I become, no matter how strong my forearm is, even if I have Popeye forearms, that bone will stay flush, small, and tight. So I apply that bone, just that one little tiny section, right to the bottom. And it's in position right now. I've done this enough that I can place it right into position without any structure. However, that doesn't mean we should do so. Let's start by applying the Achilles in full saddle so that we see that it's the mechanics that make the submission happen, not our arms. The knife edge, so we applied the shin into the hip fold, knee fights down, locked on our slip knot so we have our triangle, tucked it into the sits bones, fire pulled down, apply the tourniquet, move in the back brace and slide it up high and tight. Now, as I start removing the slop out of this little hole, I'm going to start turning my wrist up at a right angle. You can't see this. If you look closely, all you see is my knuckle lifting. That's it. Because if I do this, which is what you see, even from traditional Sambo, you see this. The fist in place, you hold the fist and you use arch. Unfortunately, look at the slop here. With this slop, as I apply force, his knee leaks leverage. So I don't get as much pain out of this hold. What I need to do is remove this space, come up as high as I can, and then start rotating up underneath. I'm exaggerating with my fingers. Don't do this with your fingers. Keep your fingers flat and only rotate your forearm. You see my knuckle lifts because I'm rotating my forearm. If you do this correctly, you should be shoveling away
the soft underbelly of his calf to get that soft tissue away and lengthen out this tendon so that you can get really close to bone on bone. Now that's full on. And look, how much arm strength am I applying? This is all my hips. I'm driving my knee down, my hips away, removing the slop out of his knee. And it doesn't even disturb my breath. If I'm here and and I'm going for 30 or 40 seconds and I start to fatigue, because that's about the endurance of our arms, and he manages to pass and go upstairs, I've blown all my energy, I've lost the technique, I didn't finish him, and I've lost position. It's a bad place to be in. Let's say I'm here and I'm moving, I'm working, right? And he happens to go through a good pass and get upstairs. I still have my energy. I haven't wasted that, even though I lost position. Sometimes you're going to not finalize the technique. 5% we always dedicate to Murphy. But 95% of the time, if you're getting a submission, you're doing a good job, if you take your time. So, to convince you, and this isn't a technique, but a principle, I'll give you 3 other examples. Let's say he leaks his knee to the outside to try and, right. That created space for him, right? So he has a little bit more freedom. Take this hand and shovel it underneath, knife hand, all the way back. Grab a hold of it at a right angle, still using the nook. That little groove, which is what it's called, underneath. Grab a hold of your own arm and start applying. Now look, as I move my shoulder back, I remove the space behind his knee. That begs the question. If I'm here, isn't it true that I should roll my shoulder back and drive my elbow down to get the submission hold? Yes, that's true, but think about this. If I remove the space with my hips, now he has no knee leakage. This is all linked together. If he's still not submitting, because after a while, if you've trained the Achilles submission for a while, you start to develop a callus to it. Like if somebody puts me in it takes a lot to get me to tap out from an Achilles submission because so many people have done it to me. However, if you're in this position and then he's not tapping, then roll your shoulder back, then drive your elbow down, and then he's done. No matter how good the person is, they can't stand that kind of tightness. So yes, that's true, but if you do this first, watch what happens. I roll my shoulder back, what's happening to the knee? Because I'm not leading from the hips, the knee leaks. So I lose all of that leverage. The other end of the lever pops up, removes all of my good stuff. So remove that first, then shoulder back and elbow down. Okay. I showed you the cross. But let's say he pulls the top hand. He can't pull the bottom hand. So let's say he pulls the top hand out of the way. Re-grab, come in tight to his thigh for the figure 4 version of the Achilles. Again, shoveling away, pushing that underbelly out of the way. Figure 4. Let's say he moves and kicks the leg down. As he kicks the leg down, you're still in position. So throttle down, grab a hold of your own wrist, take this elbow and drive it down as you move this forearm and scoop the underbelly away to apply the crowbar. So this all happens in unison. We're moving here. He happens to leak out, right? Turns the knee down to the mat. I scoop underneath and I go across, right? He reaches up, gets wrist control. He tries to pull it away. I re-grab, go for figure 4, but he moves the foot out of the way. So I go down, I re-grab again for crowbar. He kicks it back into my armpit to move that, and we go back to the beginning. Those are the only options for him unless he moves into something different. We'll go through that in the other key locks.
Your second key lock is going to be the ankle submission, and it's built off your Achilles. If you do your Achilles appropriately, as he defends against it, he'll place himself into ankle territory. Now, the difference between an ankle submission and an Achilles is, in Achilles, he has this right angle, and you're coming up at a right angle behind the tendon. As he defends against the Achilles, he points his toes, and you need to change the angle slightly so that you're working towards, if you look at the bottom of his heel, coming straight up. That's where his ankle joint is. So we're going to work cutting across that with our right angle. So we're going to turn it slightly in order to move into position. So don't look at this as a separate technique. If you try and fight the ankle lock into position, usually his toes pop out. And the reason his toes pop out is because you over-roll your shoulder, and then his toes slip out and he pops out, and then you have to restart. You're not in a bad position because you've been maintaining lower half positional fighting. So we start with our Achilles. We moved it into place, right? We're moving, and to defend against that, he points his toes. I'm going to give you a different angle in a second. So we fight back down. We move into place, roll the shoulder back, and now we're in ankle territory. Now, if you do this correctly, there's also Achilles pain involved. I'm going to give you a different angle. So first, we're in position. Come closer to me. We're in position for Achilles. I roll back. I start applying, removing slop. But he points the toes to get away from the Achilles pain. So we change the angle slightly, roll our shoulder back, remove the slop, tuck the elbow down. Now, it's real dangerous territory because now you're going to tear ligaments across the top of his foot. So you have to be careful. The goal here isn't this is my training partner. I'm not, even my opponent on a mat or in the ring, we're not trying to hobble him, we're trying to submit him. Submission is the ultimate form of martial success. So the goal isn't to injure him, but to beat him. That's a big distinction. So you should be able to methodically apply this without any injury and force him to submission. That requires slow, calculated shoulder roll. Now, if you apply this with too much, as you go to throw your shoulder back, his toes pop out anyway. So the rule is, as he moves to avoid the Achilles, he exposes his ankle to submission. Now, what does he do to defend against the ankle? But kick the heel through, again, to avoid the ankle lock, right? Where does that place him? Back at Achilles. So if he's smart, what he'll do is, and I'm going to give Ryan my ankle. To work through here, as he's going for Achilles, go ahead. He'll point the ankle, and as he moves for ankle lock, go for ankle lock, right? Not heel hook, just stay at ankle lock. As he goes for ankle lock, I'll kick my heel through, then I'll move back to Achilles. I'll point my toe, and I'll wiggle back and forth to try and create that space. So back and forth, pointing, kicking the heel, pointing, kicking the heel, so that the pain is never on one submission, enough to make you tap out. And that's going to buy time for you to start unloading this triangle and moving upstairs. So if you realize that the Achilles submission is a position of the ankle, not so much a change in technique. To move into the ankle submission, you can float back and forth, and you can also use it for your defense. Your double Achilles submission it's one of my personal favorites, and it evolves from him trying to kick off your back brace. You can also attack the double Achilles, but personally, I don't prefer that fighting strategy of attacking locks. I prefer to let him submit himself. It costs me a lot less energy. So let's assume we're in full saddle, and I have my back brace on. I haven't yet attacked it. But instead of trying to attack this with his arms, he slowly presses it away with my elbow. Now what that does is it exposes both legs. If there's any time that he has two legs in a relationship to each other, you can twirl them together like the spokes of a teepee. So as he pushes the back brace away, you just lift that heel up. Now I'm going to do this slowly. Over top, underneath. Shoot the elbow through until it's behind his heel. But you need to make sure that this bottom leg is still in your armpit. So one of the little tricks that you can do is choke up on the knee before you squeeze out the space. If he's loose and you're already tight and try and squeeze in the space, it won't work. So before you remove space, push the knee through, then hammer back. Once the hammer's back, the goal is
If you look closely at his leg, look at this bone. On this bone, it's flat on this side, right? But we kick with this sharp leading sword edge. That's the edge that you want to apply to his Achilles and to his calf. It's even sharper than this notch, than this groove. So what we have to do is, once we get the elbow behind, and I know you want to go fast, I know you want to use your forearm here, but because of this slop, he'll be able to pull his heel through. You don't want that. Take the time to fire your arm straight through until you've choked all the way beyond your elbow pit, then wrap up. Choke, squeeze. Now you're ready to reposition that blade edge of his bottom shin behind his Achilles. And to do that, you roll your shoulder back. Don't lift up. If you lift up, look how his knee leaks, right? If I roll my shoulder back, the knee can't go anywhere. So it's going to be a lot more compression onto his Achilles. So one more time, let's talk about the entry. Back brace, he kicks it away. Relationship of two legs means we can twirl them together, pull the heel up, shoot down between both legs. Choke all the way through until your elbow pit is beyond his ankle. Before you squeeze, pop the knee through, hammer back. Then reposition by rolling your shoulder back. Don't pull up. Roll your shoulder back, then squeeze this far shoulder to finish him in the double Achilles submission hold.
Many people know what the heel hook is, but my job is to accelerate how fast you can finalize the lock while minimizing your opponent's damage. I don't want to break your opponent. I want you to be able to submit him fast without any damage. That means increasing the pain. If you increase the pain, he's going to tap out faster, rather than you having to hobble him for life in order for him to come to his realization, oh, that I should have tapped out. So my goal is to make you have him tap fast rather than the ref saying, oh, he lost by forfeit. He's out on injury. Okay, so there are two versions of the heel hook I'm going to teach you. But the heel hook that I'm teaching you is based upon a principle of sinew separation, meaning look at his knee. His knee is not one solid structure. There's juice in here. We want to separate that capsule. By separating that capsule, that means that the amount that we can twist it is a lot less. So think of it this way. If I twist his heel here, look at the range of motion. It's about 90 degrees, right? If I lift and separate, look at the range of motion. It's about 45. By separating the joint capsule, you make all of that tissue very taut, like stretching out a rubber band, right? Separate it first, then you twist it. And that causes pain because it's also tendon. Ligament doesn't really hurt because it's not innervated. It doesn't have nerves like a tendon does. That's why the Achilles hurts so bad, right? So what we do is by separating the capsule, you make the tendons tender. And that's what's going to make him tap out in pain. So we separate the knee, and he pops out. Now, let's look at this for a second. I'm going for my Achilles. He points his ankle. He points his toes. We go for ankle. He kicks his heel through. We go for Achilles. He doesn't like that at all, so he tries to turn his knee down. By turning his knee down, he exposes his heel. So I don't let go. I just reposition. Tuck back in. What I want to do is I want to make sure that this third of his foot stays in my armpit. This midfoot is the point of rotation, and the heel is what we're keeping firm. So if you look at that as a lever, rear of the foot, midfoot, and forefoot, or his ball of feet, we're not rolling the heel up. We're pulling back, separating the knee, and then rolling the shoulder down to cause the submission. Think of that different than this. If I arch up, what happens? If I keep loose and arch up using my arms, he flips over because the knee's leaking force. I'm concentrating so much on my arms that I'm sacrificing the position. I'm going to be in a bad way if he passes me, but more importantly,
I just lost this technique. Maybe I injure him and I end his fighting career and I happen to win that fight. But I didn't submit him. And there's a big difference. So to submit him, to cause him to convince him he has no option but to bend to my will, I have to cause sufficient pain. And that means pulling this in, burying the laces underneath my armpit, keeping the point of rotation free, the middle of the foot, and rolling my shoulder back, keeping the heel in place, separating the knee. So I pull the knee. Look how I remove the slop here. Remove all the space behind the knee. Pull the knee, lengthen it. That separates it here. Now roll the shoulders back. Look, just a little notch. There's the tap. Not here, trying to pull up. Right? A ligamental tear, if I do get it. If not, it's going to pop out. So it's not much strength. Confirm, shoulder back, remove the slop, rotate. For your external heel hook. Now there's a variation on that. The internal, let's say he pops this open hip. On open hip, now this isn't always wise, I don't suggest it, but sometimes people that are new to lower half submission fighting will do stupid things by accident. Sometimes we just move into places we shouldn't be. So let's say we lock this on. I'll show you this later. The internal heel hook is the same. I could try and lift this up, but I'm going to be using too much strength and I might pull it out of my own armpit. So I want to make sure that the upper half of the foot is buried in. Get it tight and confirmed first. Then roll the shoulder back, separating the knee, removing the space. Let's roll this way if you can. Removing the space with the hips, pulling up by rolling the shoulder back for your internal heel hook. The goal is sinew separation, not heel lift. Your next core lock, the foot lock, is still a rather common lock, but there are some points that I want to help you with that will take out the slop and make sure that it's a lot more defensible and that you're able to use structure rather than muscle to finalize the lock. So let's first look at the position. What we're trying to do is, you know how you overtread an ankle. When you overtread your ankle, it rotates inward. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the sole of his foot around in a circle to the inside of his knee. We're going to use a 4 to achieve that, a figure 4 with our hands. But instead of using force to drive this over, what we're going to do is we're going to keep it tight to our body and crunch forward while in position. By keeping this tight to our body, we remove his ability to attack the wrists to counter this. So when we're in position, let's start with full saddle and consider it from here. Let's say that he pops it free of the heel hook. We moved our shoulder too fast and the heel pulls through, but we're already in position to wrap this on. Now, when we do this, think of this as a side crunch that you do for exercise to work on your obliques. You're still maintaining knee on the mat. You're driving the knee down and coming in with your body as you crunch upwards, rather than trying to lift up here. Now, if he fights this, he'll come up for wrist control and peel it right off. However, if this is tight to my body from here, it's going to be a lot more difficult for him to defend against. If he kicks through, if he puts that, if he adds this in, double Achilles. But if he kicks through here, kicks the heel through, we're back at the beginning. So the goal of the foot lock is bottom third, tight. Keep it tight to your body. Internally rotate the foot. Do a side crunch by keeping this married to your body as you lift up and over to finalize the lock for your foot lock.
bar is one of your primary components, but again, I want to teach you the elements of fast submission rather than using excess energy that you don't need. That requires separating the knee before you try and bend it. If you understand this, by slightly extending, like you're in traction, extending the knee and then twisting it, then it's a lot more, it has a lot less range of motion for the knee bar. So instead of just thinking of this like a water pump, where you're extending the knee and trying to place pressure down, what you want to do is extend the knee, twist, and then at an angle, apply the knee bar by lengthening it out. Let's get into reverse saddle. Now, once I'm in reverse saddle, what I want you to think of is when you lay your body down, you scoot over that way. When you lay your body down, think of lengthening the knee. So I'm going to drive my hips and my knees away. Not to cause the lock yet, although that might cause the lock right there. That's causing some tap. But I'm lengthening and stretching and separating this capsule. What I'm going to do is I'm going to twist. As I lift up my elbow, that twists the knee slightly, then I apply the pressure. And he's also getting some pain in the nerve clusters because of the tourniquet. So let's look at this piece by piece. We've entered into our reverse. When we lengthen out, we separate this capsule by lifting the heel that way. Then we slightly twist it. By twisting it, you're taking this and making it into a tight corset. By twisting it, this makes it a lot less range of motion and a lot more painful for him. The danger is, when we get to this position, we want a knee bar, right? We see his heel and we come here. Now, if he pulls on his hamstring, here, now we're fighting. The distance between here and here is how much freedom time he has to try and get in position. So he can pass the knee, shrimp the knee out, right? And start moving to back position. Never want to sacrifice back position for the low percentage chance of a submission. So, before you lay down on the ground, you've married this to your body. Come to the side. Now look, I'm already on the side of his calf. Once on the side of his calf, I'll extend out, lengthen the leg, and drive the hips away to create distance in that joint capsule. Then slightly rotate it, then apply the pressure. You might get really antsy and you want to apply it right now, but there's a lot more range of motion here than there is here. So slightly twisting it. Keep it married to your chest, and no matter where he moves, he's going to hit his own knee. What you should be able to see is with this final core lock that these are a flow. They're not individual techniques, and certainly you'll be able to extract one of the techniques, apply them as an amendment to your upper half positional fighting game, be able to attack it, and have that short, fast game access. Sure, you will be able to, but what I'm helping you understand, I hope you practice it this way, is the long, slow game where you're understanding where no matter where he moves, he's going to submit himself. That's very obvious with the knee slice. In the knee slice, if he tries to avoid the knee lock by compressing down, he put himself into position. Now, this still applies, the rule of thirds. This time it's the bottom third of my forearm to the top third of his lower leg. To do this, I need to remove all of the space and have the least amount of flesh. So it needs to be at this angle. My forearm blade needs to come up at this angle. If it's flat, it's going to be a lot more difficult, or if it's this way. The more that you hammer up, the more that you're going to remove space till you get to right to where that joint capsule is. That will make this a quick submission. So we're moving upstairs. He fights the heel back before you go down. So now we're ready to go. Now, I can end it here if he has tight thighs. If he doesn't have tight thighs, if he has loose knees, right? Let's say Ryan relaxes a little bit. Relax. Okay, see how that gives a lot more range of motion when he relaxes? But I can throw this leg over, and then I can apply it just as well.
Or I can even lock in the triangle. Try and relax. Try and relax. I can lock in the triangle and apply it even deeper. I don't want to bust open his knee. But every time that we add in a lever for the knee slice, we're getting deeper and deeper into the knee pit. That's the focus. Yes, you're trying to bring the heel back to his sits bone. But the purpose of the knee slice isn't the calf. It isn't the hamstring. It's the nape of the knee. And burying that third up as high as you can so that you've created a fulcrum where he can't bring his heel back. And as you bring it back, that's what causes the submission. Sometimes he'll try and kick out of this. As he kicks out, back to knee bar. As he pulls back to knee slice. So again, it's a flow. And it's something that you can follow by surfing his strength rather than trying to force the techniques. In the first of your advanced counters, I'm going to show you what will look like me freeing the bottom leg and applying the crowbar. It's actually a paper cutter Achilles attack. More of a calf crush depending upon where you are, but you will guarantee a lot of tappage. The goal is to free that bottom leg though, and that means that you're going to initially need to defend your own leg. So he has you in full saddle. As soon as he gets into position, don't attack him. Don't try and break his mechanics. Keep your leg close. By defending your leg, you're not in any danger right now. He still has positional dominance, but he needs to lengthen you out to put you in a position of danger. As he's fighting, now he'll need to release that in order to try and challenge this grip on my foot. But once he falls down to his side, that gives me time to free the overlacing leg of his fore. Now he can have that leg if he wants. If he has that leg, I can still come down here and attack. But I'm going to show you a quick little option. And just forget about it for now, but tuck it away in the back burner. I call it a mousetrap. I defend this leg, grab a hold, overlace it, and I'll keep that arm tied in. But first, once I free the top of this fore, tuck this leg through, now his arm's trapped. Mousetrap. Now I can come and attack this leg. I don't have much structure because I don't have a saddle as secure. I have a side saddle, if you see. So I'm going to come underneath, grab gable grip, no fingers, no thumbs, interlaced, just together. Drive the top of the top forearm down, the bottom forearm up, like a paper cutter, to apply this calf crush to submit him. I'm loosening up here so it's not so tight. But you want to keep this side saddle tight so that that forearm is wrestled in there to apply it very quickly. But even if he has that leg, you don't have a mousetrap. You can come down here and attack this leg to finish him off with your paper cutter. It's not too often that you have a perfectly tight saddle. I mean, you're always working towards it, but since this is positional fighting, you're always in a constant state of maintaining those 7 key mechanics. When you're attacking and you're working to pass and sweep, you'll find that the points of slop in his leg triangle, when he's trying to slip knot tight, are when you can attack him, when he becomes vulnerable. And one of the ways you can do that is actually a double Achilles attack while he's in the full saddle, has you in full saddle. So let's start tight. So what we'll cover this later, the passes and the sweeps, but I try and block this off, and he goes to relace it. As he relaces it, there may be some space in here while we're rolling around. You move down that way. See the space in between his knees? The lower leg isn't tight, flush into his knee pit. That creates a relationship of his shin to his calf that we can exploit. So what we need to do is take our sits bone as we pull this heel, 2 hands. If it's 1 hand, he'll slip it up in tight to avoid the pain. If it's 2 hands, you can brace it so it doesn't ride up into his knee pit. This leg kicks as we work around over to his rump. So it's a sliding motion as you come around. I don't want to do it too fast or hard. I'm going to release the pressure so that it doesn't crush his calf. Slide around. That's the motion, rather than pulling, because in pulling, you can get it here, right? But you're using too much energy. What you want to do is use position. So all I'm doing is extending my leg down, holding the relationship of his shin bone to his calf and Achilles as I move closer and closer and closer. If he does slip up underneath, I can start to fight up to protect my own leg, and we'll transition to this later as we move into a different knee slice. But the whole purpose of this double Achilles is to maintain the relationship. Maintain the relationship of his shin to his calf, kick down, pull the other direction, and block off his access of removing the pain up into his knee pit.
The bow and arrow knee compression is when he's tight in a full saddle and he has his shin buried fully into the nape of his knee. It doesn't mean that you can not attack him, though. I mean, if he has tight knees, if you know when to attack him, if you defend your leg, you can apply this and get a higher percentage amount of the times out of it. So he has you in full saddle. Now, what you need to see is thinking of the knee slice, the basic knee slice. If his shin can act as the fulcrum to separate his knee, then what we need to do is we need to take, can you lift your leg up, all the way up? Take his heel to his sits bone while his shin is stuck in his knee. You won't get this on everyone because it's based upon timing. If he has your leg and he has full saddle, you need this space in order to attack the bow and arrow. And the bow and arrow is, think of driving and pulling his foot even deeper into the nape of his knee. Pull it up. Then move your hips close to his. Now, you're losing leverage as he hips away. So one of the things that I like to do is, as he moves away from the pain, come up and relatch. If he hips away too much, right, he can transfer to a different direction. So, go ahead and relace on that arm. He's going to attack that leg, pull up, and start moving closer. The goal is to send, and it's difficult to see, so we're going to give a different angle. Spin that way. What I want you to see is me shrimping my sits bones to his. I'm not using so much arm strength in here, but only just to bury it. The main point is moving my hips, pulling my heel into his hips to come closer, to separate his knee. And if possible, to lock that on tight, to finish him in the bow and arrow knee compression. The last of your advanced counters is the side swirly. It's when your opponent has you inside saddle, but because of the depth of his saddle, he's exposed himself to a knee compression or a knee slice. So inside saddle, if you look at the relationship here, now instead of trying to release and pass his fore, we can take it out and around towards him, much like the bow and arrow, to cause a knee compression. So we take his toes, reach across to his heel, pull and drive it up. And it's a very sneaky move. Usually, a person that's very adept at the lower half positional fighting game will smell it coming early. But if you sneak up on him, he has you inside saddle, he's fighting, you're working to defend your own leg. Reach back, get your back brace. He's not going to see it coming before it's too late. Plant your foot flat, re-grab his heel, and drive his toes up. And it's too late for him. So the goal is to take this, just like the bow and arrow, and drive it up as high as you can into the nape of his knee.
get some rotation on this. So don't drive it straight back. If you drive it straight back, there's a lot more range of motion than if you internally rotate it foot. There's a lot less range of motion because the knee is now separating at the side. Pull it up, drive it underneath, and then work around for your side swirly from side saddle attack.
I hope you enjoyed the first installment of Sambo for MMA, the basics. What I want you to remember is, as you're going through and practicing these, the secrets are within the basics. The advanced techniques, all of the entries and counters and recounters and sweeps and reversals that you'll see are all based upon these core mechanics and these core locks. If you practice these, if you focus on these, all of the others will erupt and you'll unconsciously do them. Like my coach said to me, once you start on the path of the basic mechanics, all of the rest flower themselves. So keep practicing. If you want to have any questions for any of our coaches, come to rmaxinternational.com, rmaxinternational.com, and we'll see you at the next workshop.